Okay. Gab, how are you?
I'm good, Phil. How are you doing? So we're on
Um,
air.
we are officially on air. Yes, I'd like to welcome everybody who has joined in. We've got a pretty good turnout so far. So this being the second one that we're doing, the Y series of medical stop loss captives, I guess it's a good place to announce officially that we just came back from our annual meeting, right? And it was our best meeting ever year to date. And we're happy to announce that next year we're going to be in San Antonio.
Thanks, Phil.
So,
The exact date has yet to be determined, but it will be March 2023.
yep, so excited. And with that, how about we jump right into the next Y series of why are there so many medical stop loss captives out on the market? How about that?
So, the first thing we want to go through, just as an introduction to the different types of structures that there could be, is go through the different types of ownerships of the captive models that are out there on the market that we're seeing today. So, one type of ownership is the captive insurance company is owned by the captive manager. So, the captive manager is promoting for the insurance company, managing the day to day operations, getting new membership, and basically doing all of the governance, the operations of the program, which makes sense as because at the end of the day, said captive manager is the owner and is profiting from the captive insurance program. The second type of captive insurance company we're seeing on the market today in the medical stop loss field is the captive is owned by an insurance company. So this is a medical stop loss commercial carrier. Berkeley would be an example of that. So here, the insurance company is putting on the captive insurance program, has capitalized the program, is running the operations. They're engaging the service providers, they're engaging the captive manager, the other third party service providers, and they are in turn also profiting from the success of the captive program amongst the captive participants. Now, a third model that we are seeing today is producer or captive promoter owned. So this could be an array of service providers or producers that are going out to market their captive solution because they see a captive solution can benefit their clients and can also end in profit for them. So that's another type of model that we're seeing on the market. Now, the fourth is captive participant or member owned, meaning the collective captive participants own the captive insurance company. So in this model, the captive members have more autonomy, have more decision making authority because they own the captive insurance company, meaning they're engaging the service providers, they're engaging the captive manager, the actuary, they're controlling the operations of their own insurance company. So those
So
are the four key models we're seeing on the market today. Sorry, Phil, go ahead.
that's okay. I'll jump ahead anxiously, right? So when you distill it down, Gibby talks about the ownership, which is so vitally important. And then the second question that you have to ask is, who's issuing the stop loss policy? And that question then leads to, is the captive either a fronted captive or is it what's called a direct writer captive? And most of the group captives out on the market today are fronted by a commercial carrier, and that's perfectly fine. But the buyer has to understand the different models and where the insurance policies are coming from. The fronted captive, that means the commercial stop loss carrier is intimately involved in the operations of the captive program. And in the direct writer model, the captive manager is directly overseeing the insurance company operations and the affairs of the medical stop loss policy, the underwriting, the claims payments, and such.
So, Phil, why would you say it's essential for listeners today in general prospective captive clients to understand the difference between the two models?
Well, I think it all boils down to the culture of the buyer. the buyer has to understand, as does the consultant, that when you've seen one captive, you've seen one captive. So the consultant needs to educate the buyer on, if you're looking for a fronted model or you want involvement with the commercial carrier, then a fronted model is completely fine. If you want to be more involved in the insurance company operations, maybe a direct writer is more fits your culture a little bit better.
Makes sense. So the point is to put forward the different options that are on the market, again, because the series is to educate prospective clients, consultants, to make the right decision for themselves, for their clients, for their companies. You need to know the questions to ask to move forward into the correct captive solution.
Absolutely.
So before we keep going, are there any questions regarding the different models that have come up, Phil?
There are no questions yet, so onward and upward.
Okay. Onward and upward. So Phil just talked about the difference between a fronted model issuing the insurance paper and a direct writer model where the direct writer, the captive itself, is issuing a paper to its employer, insured business, so on and so forth. So there's a few different questions you want to ask if you are thinking of engaging in a fronted model versus direct writer model. So for a fronted model, the main question you need to ask is, who's the fronting carrier? Who's the commercial insurance company behind the scenes? Who is putting this program on? Who's controlling the operations of the program? So that's a vital question to ask. And then also in turn, that no commercial carriers doing this out of their altruistic nature, right? There's a fee. So what's the fronting fee to participate in that program? Because there's obviously going to be premium expense. So you also want to understand what additional fees are going into the program so you can budget accordingly. Now, a third important question is, what's the quota share of risk that the captive is taking and what benefit could the captive receive? So in a fronted model, the fronted carrier will assume a portion of the risk and the captive will retain a portion of the risk. And then you need to understand at the end of the day, if there's profits, how are those profits allocated back? The fronted carrier is obviously going to keep a percentage of those profits, and some way may be able to go back to the captive participants. But understanding percentage, sharing ratios is something an informed buyer should be asking when going into the program like that. Now, there's also likely going to be an excess layer of reinsurance through an excess insurance carrier. So that's another fee that could be built into the program, and you need to understand who that player is and what the associated excess reinsurance premium is. And then the last question is, ask for the bordereau report, ask for the financials, ask for the insurance reporting, ask for the details about what's the premium, what are the expenses, what comes out of premium, what could be my profit at the end of the day. Those are the questions that you need to be asking to be making an informed decision.
That is entirely correct. And we'll talk about the bordereau report in a little bit more detail a little later. But now the questions that someone should be asking about the direct writer model is, how is the captive structure owned? Is it owned by the members? Is it owned by the captive manager? Is it owned by someone else? So that's also a similar question that you need to ask for a direct writer. And then capitalization. So with a direct writer captive, there is what's called capitalization. It's very equivalent to paid-in capital if you're starting a new business. In the fronted model, a lot of times it's simply collateral, and the collateral is generally held by the commercial stop-loss carrier. And that collateral acts as like a shock absorber. So if in any one month there were excessive claims, that collateral could be tapped into to buy claims. And again, with a direct writer model, there's quota share. Not all captives keep 100% of the quota share of the risk. So in other words, if the captive has a 90-10 quota share, that means the captive keeps 90% of the risk and 10% goes out to a third party or a seeding company of that sort. So quota share is also part of the discussion for direct writer. And then, of course, just like every insurance company, a direct writer captive also has some level of excess coverage, because no insurance company should really keep 100% of the risk that the insurance company takes. So at some point, the really, really big claims go out to a third-party insurance company. And then finally, although it's not called a bordereau report within the direct writer model, it's called a ceding report. It's called a ceding report because the captives within the risk pool cede risk to each other. So it has a little bit of a different name, but it also has the same mechanics. And seeing the bordereau report, seeing the ceding report, that's the recipe for the secret sauce that every consultant and buyer should evaluate. So with that, yeah, my favorite topic is the bordereau report, right? We talk about this all the time.
Right. And this is often the report that is not easily accessible. If you're not asking for it, the fronted captive model isn't going to be producing it for you. In the direct writer model, the ceding report is full transparency. That's the report you should be asking for.
Yeah. So we have heard that the street is sort of pushing back on sharing the bordereau report. And the reason being is it's the recipe. It shares with the consultant and the buyer the costs, the percentage of premium. It shares on who's getting paid and what are they getting paid. Because at the end of the day, if the employer's paying $100 of premium, how much of that premium is used to pay claims? Is it $50? Is it $60? Is it $40? Well, that knowledge is going to provide insights that really every buyer should have knowledge of. Because if you don't know what frictional costs you're going to have with a captive, you're only getting half the story, right? So the bordereau report is very important.
Thanks, Phil. So we just went over some of the key questions you need to ask for a fronted model versus direct writer. Now we're going to go through some key questions that you need to ask for both, because this is medical stop loss insurance. So a lot of the characteristics are the same. While there are differences, there are key concepts that carry between the two different models. So first is policy underwriting. You need to understand how policy premium is achieved, how it's underwritten. Usually, the insurance program itself will have an underwriting committee. The captive manager will be involved in the underwriting process, but you need to understand who the third-party actuary is that is actually testing, confirming the accuracy of the premium that is being written by each captive under the insurance policies that are issued in the captive program. So that's a key aspect that you need to understand when going into a captive program, is to understand how the underwriting works. Because underwriting the policies, the claims exposures, legitimizes the captive insurance program.
Absolutely, Gab. And one step further, the underwriting profit. So within businesses, everyone has profitability, right? And that profit is like the bottom line revenue to the business. And with insurance and captives, that's no different. That's just labeled as underwriting profit. And we're big believers here that underwriting profits that have been earned by the clients, the members, the employers, they should be earned and delivered ultimately to the members, right? So if the captive collects $1 million of premium and only has $500,000 of expenses, that $500,000 of profit should be fully earned by the members. And some group captives and some direct writer captives, I'm sure, if they're out there, they sometimes have what's called golden handcuffs, meaning you got to be in the captive for so long before you take your underwriting profits with you, or if you leave, you forfeit your underwriting profits. I'm not sure that's entirely a fair transaction, really. I guess that's the best way to call it. But we're big believers on what you've earned should be kept by the employer.
Right. So ask the questions. What's the history of distributions of underwriting profits back to the captive participants? What's the timeliness of those distributions? Is there a set procedure for distribution of underwriting profits? all things that are important to understand going into the program.
Yep, absolutely.
So, as the attorney, the next topic, governance. I think it's extremely important. Others may think, oh, well, I'm entering the captive, I'll be a participant. But there are a lot of really important key governance aspects you need to understand. First being is, how is the captive insurance program run? Do you, as a captive participant, have a vote in the operations, or are you essentially just a captive participant subject to whatever authority is above the captive participants running the program? Now, usually in a member owned program, which I talked about in the slide before, the members are the participants, are the owners of the company. They are running the operations of the company. So there's more governance in that model than some of the other models we discussed. Now, one key thing to think about with captive voting and governance is, are the service providers accountable? Are they doing their job? If not, do the captive participants have a right of recourse against those service providers? If the captive manager isn't doing their job, then there needs to be an ability to, discuss that with the captive manager or remove them if necessary. And then it's also really important to understand what the key governance documents are. Is there a participation agreement documenting ownership, rights of distributions? How is risk shifting and risk distribution achieved in the program? All things that need to be asked and understood before entering into the transaction.
Man, I'll tell you what, I would say governance and ownership isn't just a thing, it's the thing, because most employers that I've talked to join captives, Gabby, because they want more control. Mm-hmm. And we are firm believers that 100% control needs to be allocated to the members. And you did a fantastic job of expressing that. So as the attorney, thank you for that.
Thank you, Phil.
Because you seek my approval, right?
Mm-hmm.
But lastly, the one thing that is also very important is the financials of the captive. Even though the bordereau report will tell you 9/10 of what you need to know about the costs and the premium loads and everything of that nature that are baked into your premium, you should still see the audited financial statements, because within the audited financial statements, you're going to see the captive's expenses and what we use as SG&A, sales, general, and administrative costs. That's where you're going to see how much is the captive manager earning, how much is the auditor earning, how much are the tax returns costing. So these sort of things are another piece of the puzzle that a fully informed buyer and consultant really need to have a frank discussion on to make a buying decision based on all the facts. Because the captive buying decision is, it should be more of displaying the facts and seeing how much of my $100 premium is being used to pay claims and how much is used to pay service providers. Because you'd be surprised, there's a lot of frictional costs with some captives. So we just want you to be better informed.
Great.
So that's it.
So that was a lot. There's a lot of questions that we've gone through that should be asked. So if anybody has any questions for us regarding this process, please feel free to ask or follow up with us via phone call, email, LinkedIn post, message, however you'd like to proceed after we conclude the session.
Yep, and we as captive managers, we are here to build a captive solution for consultants, for clients. We're here to turn that light switch on. With that, I want to thank everyone.
Everybody.
Have a good day.